Alright, hello. Welcome back to That Engineering Girl. Before I even address what this video is about, let me address why I'm in the car. Okay, so after a series of events, whether unfortunate or fortunate, if you will, I ended up at university way before I planned to be here. And because I was already going to film this video later on, I thought, you know what, let's just film it now, because the lighting won't be even somewhat reasonable like it is now. So that is why I'm filming this video in the car, because I know people just really have requested this video so many times, and I've really just wanted to get it out and push it out. It's taken so much effort to put together, and I really just want to get it up. So the faster I film this, the quicker I film this, the quicker I edit it, the quicker I post it. So that is why I'm filming this in the car. Now, the video. Okay, so on to the video. I'm finally addressing my Microsoft internship, what the process was like, what my interviews were like, and I'm also going to go over tips for you if you're interested in a Microsoft or generally a big tech internship, and what I would suggest you keep in mind while going through the process. I believe this is going to be a very long video, so get yourself tea, get yourself coffee, get yourself kombucha if you're like me, and brace yourself. Okay, let's get into this. Okay, so let's start from the very beginning, which is September 2021, which is when I applied onto the, Microsoft hiring portal. I applied for the Silicon Engineering internship, plugged and chugged my resume, my work experiences, my skill tags, all of that jazz, and clicked the submit button. I don't really have any advice here other than the fact that make sure you populate your skill tags as much as you can, as accurately as you can. Make sure you populate your work experiences, because the hiring manager or whoever's reviewing these will most likely review the fields that you've filled out before even downloading your resume and looking at that. So, just take the time, fill it out properly if you're serious about this. Okay, so following that, at the end of September 2021, I got an email requesting a virtual interview, a virtual first interview, with a link to a calendar to choose my interview time slot, which I did. I also got some general tips in that email on, how to succeed in the interview and how to generally prep for it. My tip here is, don't rush it. A lot of people rush it and go like, oh, it's already September, they're already hiring people, I want to get my interview as fast as possible so the spots don't fill up. I highly recommend that you do not rush yourself. Choose a slot that will give you enough time to prep, because you want to be prepared, you want to be collected, you want to know what you're talking about, right? You want to have practice. So take your time, don't rush it, you'll be fine. There's a spot for you, okay? You'll be fine. Okay, let's fast forward to October 2021, so mid-October 2021, which is when I scheduled my first interview for, and the morning of, I actually had a recruiter reach out to me to tell me that the interviewer said to them not to take it as a software engineering interview, that there might be coding, but there will also be hardware questions, and it's going to be a mix of lots of different things. So they warned me basically not to prepare or not to expect a typical software engineering interview, which, if you're familiar with, it's just a lead code. That's really all it is. Lead code and probably a couple of behavioral questions. With that said, let's get into the actual interview that I had. So first of all, my interviewer was super calm, super collected, and I love the environment he set up. He made it seem like we were just having a conversation. It wasn't like near-death experience, as you may feel like it is if you're, interviewing for the first time. He made it very friendly, and I love that. I love interviews that just feel like a conversation. You're just asking each other questions, figuring out if you're a good fit. So I really liked that about him. And now I'm going to actually reference my notes to kind of go over what I was asked. I can't tell you exactly what he asked me for, disclosure reasons, but I will try to give you a good description, an overview of what my interview looked like. So here that is. So obviously he started off by asking me some general logistic questions like, do I have competing offers, what area of silicon engineering I'm interested in. So he gave me I think one of the things he listed was verification, and then location restrictions, stuff like that. And that's when we got into the actual interview. So he started off by asking me one of the projects I had listed on my resume. And he asked me about this in detail. What about it did I like? How did I contribute to it? Did I consider certain problems in it that would have arisen? What technologies did I use? All of that jazz. It was definitely something that you need to know your stuff for. So we started off with that. Following that, he asked me about one of my previous internships and one of the projects that I had built during that internship. It was very relevant to some of the work he was doing. So he asked me a lot about that and, how fulfilling I found it and, the impact that I had, all of that jazz. So we went over that internship, and then this is where the silicon engineering part came in, because he proceeded to ask me a very, very low-level assembly language question. Would this instruction or would this line of code be faster in assembly, would this line of code be less instructions in assembly versus this line of code? And, I did get the question wrong, mind you, but, I made sure to kind of work through it and show my thought process. So he asked me that, and then he went on to ask me a very basic coding question. If you're in software engineering, and you know what, let's not even talk about software engineering. If you've taken any sort of basic programming course, if you have a first year general engineering year like I do in my degree, you'll have seen this problem. Okay, it's a very common, very, very common software engineering problem that's shown to beginners. So, he gave me this basic coding question. I did it, I think, in Python or C. It didn't really matter. And so I did that. Okay, and then of course, because Microsoft and I believe also other big tech companies are infamous for this, he asked me a brain teaser question. Now this question, it wasn't like I was absolutely baffled, but you really have to think about these questions. You really have to think about, okay, like if I'm given this problem, what are the different, how do I need to interpret it? What's my environment like? Like, what's my system like? And what different pieces can I play with? So you really have to take your time with this, really work through it. And you know what? I got stuck a lot of times, and I would just be like, hey, I'm stuck. I don't know how to proceed. Do you have any hints for me? Right? So just work with your interviewer, and you'll be fine. You'll be fine even if you get something wrong, okay? Just be honest. So yeah, we went through that brain teaser question. I did get most of it. I think I actually got it right, but I did have to work through it and, go back and forth with him. And then, of course, again, it's Microsoft. We finished off the first interview with a behavioral question on team conflict and how I would manage conflict with a team member. Okay. Phew, that was the list of questions, or the list of things that we talked about in my first interview, or the list of things that were asked of me. And then I was given time to ask questions to the interviewer. Please prepare questions, by the way. It just looks, I don't think I need to cover that. Just prepare questions. I prepared some questions and I asked him those. And then, we went on our merry way. That was literally it. By the way, I haven't mentioned this. I am giving some tips here and there throughout as I'm talking, but at the very end, I'm going to consolidate all of this and just give you some key tips that I would suggest you keep in mind if you're going through this process. Okay, so I was supposedly supposed to hear back in 2 to 4 weeks, but when I didn't, I reached out at the beginning of December 2021, I believe, to kind of check in with my recruiter, see what's up, when I would hear back, when I would get an update. And the recruiter just got back to me and said, hey, it's super, super busy, lots of applications, it's Christmas time, people are going on vacations, really hard to just get things together, so I'll probably get back to you at the beginning of January. And I was like, okay, cool. It is what it is. I shall wait. Okay. Come mid-January, I was told that I had done great and that they would like to book final interviews. So we went ahead and booked those, did all of the logistics, and I had my final interviews booked for mid-February. Or actually the beginning of February is when I had my final interviews booked. By the way, if you haven't noticed, I'm wearing a Microsoft crew neck. It's one of the crew necks I got while on internship, so, you know, just very appropriate for the video. Very appropriate. Thought I would, you know, be a little cheeky, if you will. Anyways, okay, let's get on to the final interviews. Okay, gotta take a deep breath for this because these were long. Okay, these interviews were long. I had 4 60-minute interviews back to back, okay, for my internship. The first interview was software focused. I spoke with a woman engineer, I believe, whatever her role was. It was more software focused. She started off by, you know, we actually had a really great conversation to begin with, just like, hey, how's it going, you know, just connecting, that kind of thing. And then when we finally got the interview going, she started off by asking me in detail about one of the actually electrical projects that I had worked on. So it was a remote control car that I had built with a few other students for one of our design courses, and she asked me about my role, the PCB that I had built, the power stuff that I did in that project. So she asked me extensively about that project, and then she asked me 2, I would say, medium difficulty coding questions. They were both not necessarily difficult, and I would say the first one you probably most likely will encounter in your degree or your, you know, your programming beginner career, because I have seen it in my degree. The second one was a bit more abstract, a bit more, you know, more of a lead code type of question, but nonetheless it was definitely approachable and you could solve it. So that was my first 60-minute interview. Okay, my second interview was also software focused, but much more low level, and I'll explain what that means. Like the first interview, my second interviewer started off by asking me very in detail about one of the projects I had worked on for a previous internship. He asked me grueling questions that I'm thinking, oh my god, I would have been absolutely crushed if my manager and I hadn't already tackled those questions and those difficult design considerations at that time when I was working on this project, because they were difficult questions, and I do believe that the interviewer was impressed by how when he asked these questions I would be like, that's a good question because we actually thought about that and we addressed this issue, or we came up with a solution to that problem or that design constraint, and so on and so forth. So we had a really, like, when I say in-depth, I mean in-depth, like nitty-gritty conversation about this very, very technical conversation about this project, okay? And it was an embedded systems project, if you're curious. He then proceeded to ask me a medium in difficulty, I would say a medium difficulty coding question. He asked me a coding question in C. It was interesting because it was a difficult question. It was actually I would rate it medium to difficult, probably more on the difficult side. It was definitely a difficult question because when he first gave it to me, I thought, oh my god, this is so hard. But, you know, I thought about it and, you know, I worked through it and I came up with a solution that I thought I can't speak, that I thought would work. And it was really interesting because he was like, I'm interested in seeing if this works because I've never thought about doing it that way and it would be really cool if it works that way. So we implemented it and it actually did work. So I'm very happy about kind of that experience and how, you know, I showed him something different maybe. Then he proceeded to build on that and give me some more coding questions, but to implement in Python instead. So, if I wanted to do some sort of pre or post processing on some sort of, files, or, if I wanted to give certain inputs in a very specific way, how would I do that in Python? He asked me those questions. So my third interview was with the hiring manager, and it was a hardware/behavioral interview. So my interviewer started off by asking me some behavioral questions related to team conflict, the very expected question of, why Microsoft, and, typical behavioral questions. Because this was for the validation team, he also asked me a hardware question where, if I was given a chip with certain constraints, how would I test it in different ways? He also asked me related hardware questions. That was also it was a good interview. The hardware questions did make me think a little bit, so definitely challenging as well. Lastly, by far, the most challenging interview that I had was my last interview. It was all hardware, and more than that, it was all about processors. All about processors. Of course, my interviewer did start off by asking me about one of the miscellaneous projects that I had up on GitHub, I believe. I don't believe it was on my resume. We talked about that. I'll be honest and say I didn't remember too much about it, and I said that to him, hey, it's been a while since I've worked on this. I'll do my best to answer your questions, but I don't remember it too well. And then we moved on to the processor stuff. So he asked me a lot of processor questions, like mind-numbing, mind-melting processor questions, okay? This is probably, by far, the most difficult conversation I have had in my life, probably. Or at least one of the most difficult conversations I've had in my life. He asked me questions that were probably PhD level and above for processors, okay? And I'm not saying that he expected me to know these. He didn't at all give off that vibe. He was probably more so just looking to understand how I approached problems. And, I made it very obvious, like, hey, I'm struggling here. I need some help. And he really helped me work through these issues. These questions took a lot of energy. By the end, I felt like I didn't have a brain. Like, that interview absolutely drained me. I didn't have energy to talk after that interview, but it was probably also one of the most stimulating and interesting conversations I've had in my life. So I actually really, really liked that interview, but it was definitely very, very difficult. I had time after each interview to ask the interviewer questions, and of course I had also prepared questions for each interviewer to ask. I didn't know who they were beforehand. I just had prepared questions for each interviewer, and I asked them with the few minutes they gave me at the end of each interview. Overall, it definitely was a very extremely intense process, but the next day I literally got the offer saying, hey, they loved me, they want me at Microsoft, so that was very, very exciting. With that said, here are 5 tips that I would suggest you keep in mind when going through this process. 1, be familiar with your resume, because these interviews are extremely, and I say extremely, tailored to your resume and your experience. No 2 interviews are the same, because it really, really depends on what your background is and what skills you claim to have. So I highly recommend to not fabricate experiences or skills. Be honest with the skill set that you have and what you have achieved, and you should be fine. 2, it's okay to be wrong. I was wrong a few times during the interviews, but I would be like, oh, that's interesting. Can you explain why that's the answer? Or can you explain kind of the background behind that? Or I'm going to search that up later on. So, own it. Own your failures. It's okay. It's okay to be wrong. They like to see that. 3, also along the same lines, don't be afraid to ask for help. I got stuck a few times. You just want to ask for help. Be like, hey, I'm stuck. I need a hint. Do you have something for me? Or, I'm kind of thinking about these 2 things. What do you think? Ask them to get involved. You're just having a conversation. They are interviewing you, but, ask them for help. It's okay. 4, along the same lines, take your time. I know a lot of people feel very rushed in these interviews, but take your time, work through problems, say stuff out loud, really think through your answers. Don't just on the ball, say something, because usually when you don't think something through, you might usually be wrong, okay? At least in my experience, that's what's happened. So take your time. No one's rushing you. You're fine, okay? Take your time. 5, I've also mentioned this, my biggest tip is be honest, okay? Be honest with them when you don't know something, when you're like, I don't remember that. Like in my last interview where I said, hey, I'm going to be honest and say, I don't remember this project very much. I'm going to try my best to answer your questions. Be honest with them. These are smart people, okay? And these are experienced people who know when people are lying to them, okay? Be honest, because you're really setting yourself up for a failure if you aren't honest in these interviews, okay? So be honest. Alright, okay, like I promised, long video, lots of information. I hope this has helped all the people that have requested this video, as well as all the people that are just, came by and watched it. I hope you luck in the process if you're currently in it, and if you would like to be in it, I also wish you luck. With that said, until next time.